Hi everyone, and welcome to Habit 3, Put First Things First. In this activity, we're going to talk about a couple different aspects within Habit 3, and we're going to call it our will and our won't power. As we go through this activity, you're going to work through the slides as well. You can follow along with this video, and when I tell you to pause, you're going to go into these slides and complete the activities that are embedded within the slides. Let's get started. So to begin, on the next page of this document, what you're going to do is you're going to do a quick write. Please make a list of all of the different responsibilities you have in a week. So you can start with the weekend, you can start thinking about just the weekdays, whatever works for you, but think and go through each day. What are the things you have to do when you first get up, on the way to school, when you get to school, after school? All of these different things are going to be pieces of your day that you're going to want to include, like school, chores, babysitting, if you have any extracurricular activities, as well as sports. So go ahead and on the next slide, you're going to complete this 2-minute quick write, where I want you to make a list of at least 15 things that you have to do or even want to do over the course of this week. Go ahead and pause the video now and complete this part of the activity. After you create your list, let's take a look. How busy are you? Some of you might have realized that you have a very long list of things that you have to do this week, that you're responsible for. That means you're probably busy, you're engaged, and you have a long list of things that you're involved in, as well as maybe responsibilities at home and at school. What it's important for us to consider is, do we have time for all of these things this week? A lot of times the saying comes up, there's only so many hours in the day. But what happens when you don't have time for something? How do we decide which tasks are most important? And how do we decide to still make time to practice self-care, to do the things that we want to do the things that make our life happy and fulfilled? So we're going to show you a couple of tools on how to make sure that that happens for you. Let's go. If you feel that you're overwhelmed, Habit 3 is a really helpful one for you. It's called Putting First Things First. And it sounds really simple, but it can actually be one of the hardest habits to actually ingratiate into your life. It's all about prioritizing and managing your time so that your first things actually do end up coming first. It's really easy for us to kind of just get in habits of doing things that we want to do at any given time. Or when we feel overwhelmed, we put aside the things that we have to do and instead just procrastinate it with something maybe that we want to do or a distractor. But it's important to practice the skill of thinking about all the things you have to do, either just in your head, putting them out on a list, finding a method that works for you so that your first things don't come last. The way that the book describes this and the tool that it uses is called time quadrants. So time quadrants basically help you pack more into your day, especially these important things, while still making time for the things that you want to do or self-care. It's made up of kind of two ingredients. We call them two columns. We sort our things into important and urgent. Right, so there are things that are important, and these are the first things that you want to complete, right? Activities that contribute to your life goals. They are actually important. Urgent, even though urgent as a word sounds important, right? But urgent are pressing things that demand your immediate attention, whether or not they're actually important to you. Sometimes we have to do urgent things, and sometimes we don't. And that's where we see our other two ingredients in these quadrants. So urgent and not urgent kind of go up against important and not important. So urgent things that are also important help you to kind of see what has to be done in the immediate. But it's also a way to think about of how could I procrastinate? How could I do better so that I'm not procrastinating these things and so that I'm prioritizing these things? So urgent, important things, if you find that a lot of your things fall into that category, you might be a procrastinator. So you're like, oh my goodness, I have a test tomorrow. I haven't studied, right? It's important because it's important that you pass, but it's also urgent now, rather than making it not urgent so you can do it ahead of time, right? So the project is due today, your car breaks down, there's an emergency in the family, right? Even though that's not necessarily procrastination, they are urgent and important. Quadrant 2 is made up of our not urgent things that are still important. So that's the ones that we have prioritized and thought of ahead of time, right? So exercise, essays that are due a week from now, our friendships, our family, relaxing, and practicing that self care. So this is a lot of planning and goal setting. Our urgent things that are not important are the ones that kind of come up, right? Those are the ones that are other people's kind of small things, our interruptions, things that we're pressured to do. And if we fall into that category too much, we can become a little bit of like a yes man. So answering those unimportant phone calls and staying on the phone for an hour and a half, talking about nothing, right? That's not important to us, but it is urgent, right? It's happening right now. So we could spend our time better elsewhere. And lastly, even though I don't love the word slacker, the not urgent things that are not important, if we spend too much time in this category, it's a time waster, right? So spending lots of time on a video game, walking around and shopping, the book calls them mall marathons, watching too much TV, being on Netflix all day, endless time on your phone, right? Scrolling through TikTok for 4 hours. Those are not urgent things that are also not important, and they draw time away from the things that are urgent and important. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take your activities from that list on slide 3, that list of 15 things that we made of things you want to do as well as things you have to do. And you're going to sort them into the 4 quadrants. Remember that urgent, important are the things that are like, oh, I have this tomorrow, right? It's urgent. It's today. It has to happen right now. And maybe I could have prioritized it a little bit better. Our not urgent, important things are the things that you're prioritizing on kind of a greater scale on the way out. Not important and urgent are like the things that come up. So you might not actually have a lot in this category because they tend to kind of pop up in the moment. So you probably don't have them on your list, or maybe there will be very few. And your not urgent, not important are the things that maybe are maybe more of self-care, but also things that aren't going to kind of contribute to our overall goals, like video games, being on our phone, things like that. So please take the time now to sort all of those items into this chart. Do your best. If there are some things that fit in multiple areas, you can just make your best judgment, and please pause the video to complete this activity now. So how can we start spending more time in quadrant 2? Obviously, most of the things in quadrant 2, like we talked about, are the things that we are prioritizing because they're important, but also we are making time for them on the way out, right? Looking ahead into our end in mind and saying, oh, I have to do these things, but they need to happen in pieces, or they need to happen over the course of a couple of days or weeks. So we really do want to shrink our Q1 by making sure we're procrastinating less and saying no to things that we can avoid, right? Those urgent interruptions, the peer pressure activities. We also want to cut down on our quarter 4 activities or just use them as downtime, right? Even though we're all busy, it is important to schedule that time, but we want to make sure it doesn't draw away from the things that are important, like the things in quadrant 2. So starting to prioritize, there are a couple of different tools we can use. Using an agenda is a really important way to make sure you're aware of due dates, remind yourself. Using a calendar in your phone is another really great way if you're not a fan of a paper agenda. We've always got our phones on us, so utilizing that calendar or finding an app to set reminders is a really great idea. So that would be great. We just have to remember that to write these dates and times down as well, right? So our after school activities, practices, things like that, or even scheduling in times with friends, if you have times with family, writing in and scheduling those things down are an important step to making that work. Take time on one day a week. A lot of people do Sunday just because it's kind of the start of the week, just to plan out what's going on. So you have it in the back of your head, but you also have it written down somewhere or typed into your phone. Identifying your big rocks is also important. And that sounds kind of silly, but we're going to explain it on this next slide here. But your big rocks are your important things for the week. We're going to start to identify what those big rocks are, what are some common ones. But you also want to think about your role as a student, as a family, by yourself, right? Who are you to yourself as a team? Start to think about your various roles so that you can prioritize that time accordingly. So speaking of big rocks, we're going to watch this video, which is linked in your slides. Click on the word video to access it. And you're going to answer the question, how can we start prioritizing our big rocks, right? What are the big rocks in your life and how can you prioritize them and make sure that you're addressing them in a way that is healthy and productive? So pause the video, go into the slides, make sure you're writing complete sentences, 3 to 5 sentences. Shouldn't be too hard. There's quite a bit of information, and watch that video. So planning for our big rocks, as you saw, is going to be an important task because you have to have time for them, right? Big rocks don't fit in small spaces. So you have to make sure that with your big rocks, you're chipping away at them slowly, right? If other things come out throughout the week, please make an adjustment, right? Please make sure that you're doing all of these things with those big rocks in mind so that you can schedule your time accordingly. Right. So for example, maybe a new assignment is due on Wednesday and your big rock for the week was your assignment. That's your book report on Thursday, right? So you need to make sure that you're addressing those big rocks with the other big rocks that kind of come up in mind. You are the one that's in control of your time. So a good example of someone who is pretty good at prioritizing, but we don't usually think of him in that kind of way. This is somebody who is going to sound pretty familiar to you, but it might not sound familiar based on this description. He failed in business at the age of 21, was defeated for the state legislature at the age of 23, coped with the death of his sweetheart at the age of 26, had a nervous breakdown at 27, lost a congressional nomination at 34, lost a renomination at 39, was defeated for a Senate race at the age of 46, was defeated for the vice presidency at the age of 47, and lost again in the Senate at the age of 49. But he's one of our most favorite figures. So who do we think this person is? It is one Abraham Lincoln. One of the most successful people in history, is a pretty big failure early in life, right? If you view it as the way that he didn't achieve his goals, right? He didn't get those big rocks, but he kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and eventually achieved his goals. So it's a good, funny little story to consider. So being successful takes discipline to manage our time, right? To overcome our fears, to be strong in hard moments, and to resist that peer pressure. In a 7-habit survey of thousands of people, habit 3 is the hardest, like we said at the beginning, right? It's really difficult to integrate those habits into your life. It just takes practice. So speaking of practice, we are going to continue practicing habit 3, and we're going to figure out a time quadrant activity for the rest of our week. We're going to continue to use this to plan for next week. So we're going to plan for our next week in the next activity. So please go ahead and complete that in Google Classroom now.